What's up everybody, Greg here from Lens Pro To Go and Lens Rentals, and in today's video we're going to be taking a look at a new camera from Fujifilm, the X-T3. Now this camera is the evolution of the X-T2 and compares really well with the X-H1, which is their more video focused mirrorless camera. So in this video I'm going to talk about some of my first impressions of it and really how it stacks up against those two other cameras. So let's roll the intro and then we'll get into all the things you need to know. So like I said in the beginning, the Fuji X-T3 is a really good blend of the X-T2 with its smaller form factor and body style, and the video features that come with the X-H1. And it really takes all of those and then bumps them up a level and really improves pretty much everything all around. Now from the outside, the body, it looks very, very similar to the X-T2 and almost has an identical form factor to it. They have updated a few small things, like taking some of the larger buttons from the X-H1 as well as the larger mode collars, so they're a little bit easier to see and a little bit easier to move around. And they've also added a locking diopter on the EVF, so you can adjust it and then lock it down, and then you won't have to worry about it bumping when you stick it in your bag or you're just moving around accidentally rubbing against it. Other than that, this camera is almost identical. It has the same tilty, flippy screen that the X-T2 has, as well as the X-H1. It has two dual SD card slots, both of them UHS 2. And then on the other side, which this is pretty interesting and this is really nice to have, is you now have a mic input and you also have a headphone jack. So instead of having to get that extra battery plate, you have a headphone jack built in. You also have USB-C power and data transfer, so you're gonna be able to charge it through the camera in here, and then you can also transfer to your computer, so now you don't need to keep extra dongles with you. And it's really nice if you're traveling and you already have a MacBook Pro, you won't need to keep an extra charger with you as well. And then you also have a micro HDMI for sending your signal out to an external recorder, which will be important when we talk about some of the codecs later on. And then the last thing, which you might have noticed while I was talking about it and showing you all of these ports, is you can actually take off the door pretty easily. It just snaps right on. So if you're putting it in a cage or you're using any of these ports, you can take that door off without having to worry about breaking it. But be aware that if you do take off this door, it is no longer fully weather sealed. All of these ports will be susceptible to the elements like dirt and dust and water. So if it gets in there, it's definitely going to do some damage. So just be careful when you take this door off that you're not using it in any sort of inclement weather. The other big thing about this camera, which is really where all of this is a lot of the internals and some of the processing and this brand new APS-C size sensor. It's a 26.1 megapixel sensor that is backside illuminated. So you're hopefully going to get some better dynamic range as well as better low light performance with this new sensor. And it's also the highest megapixel APS-C size sensor that has ever been made, I'm pretty sure. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure. Now, the one downside to this new APS-C sensor is that you don't get in-body image stabilization like you do with the X-H1. Now, this is a pretty big feature for video shooters, especially if you're doing a lot of handheld, sort of on-the-go stuff. You want to have as stable footage as possible. Now you only get it if you have a lens that has image stabilization instead of sort of comboing the lens and the in-body together to get some really smooth footage. So that's basically all of the build of the X-T3, very similar to the X-T2 if you've ever used that camera before. Now let's take a look at some of the specs and features that they've packed into this little tiny camera, which is where it really starts to pull ahead of both of the others. So let's start off with some of the video specs of the X-T3. You can get 4K 60p, which isn't in a ton of cameras right now, so it's really impressive that this little thing can do it. That is only an 8-bit, but you get a 400 megabits per second data rate, which is really nice. So you're gonna have a really good, robust file. Along with this 4K 60p, you can also do 4K at 30 frames and under with a 10-bit 420 internal recording. And if you send it out through the HDMI, you can do a 10-bit 422 using the new H.265 codec. And you can also switch to H.264 if you want a smaller file and only in 8-bit. Now, one thing to note with these files is that they are pretty massive and currently Premiere does not work too well with them. So you're gonna have some pretty laggy footage unless you transcode it over into like a ProRes or something that Premiere's a little more friendly with. You can do it if you use a super low resolution or you're using proxies, but you're gonna have a little bit of a tough time right now working with this H.265 format. Now over to the photo side where they've done a ton of improvements as well. You have a 2.1 million dot phase detection autofocus system, which is absolutely fantastic. It basically covers the whole frame, the whole sensor, and you can go right to those edges. There's so many autofocus points in here and it works really, really well in video and in photo. Some really nice face tracking options with choosing which eye you want to focus on or just doing a eye face detection. So far, the autofocus has been performing really, really well, even in those lower light situations, which I think has helped due to that backside illuminated sensor. There is a new base ISO for photo, which is 160. It was 200 on the previous one, and you can actually expand that to an ISO of 80 if you want to get a little bit lower. And then where this thing really starts to kick it up is with its frames per second when shooting photos. You can do 11 frames per second on the mechanical shutter, which is using the actual actuation. You can do up to 20 frames per second with no blackout using the electronic shutter. And then it has this expanded mode up to 30 frames per second with no blackout, but you do get a 1.25 crop on the sensor, which is already a 1.5. So you're getting close to a 2x range on whatever your lens is. This is going to be a really good thing for sports and wildlife photographers who are trying to get that extra reach out of all of their lenses. So that's most of the stuff and where it's sort of stepped up and above the X-T2. But how does this compare against the X-H1 for video? Because that camera was really designed for our video shooters. Well, the one big thing that you're going to notice between the two is that the X-H1 has that in-body image stabilization and the X-T3 does not. So if that's something you need, you're definitely going to want to lean towards the X-H1. But with the X-T3, you get that better image quality with the new sensor. You have better dynamic range. You have 4K 60, 10-bit internal recording, 422 10-bit external recording, and you also have the brand new phase detect autofocus system, which is absolutely fantastic, and you get that edge-to-edge focus coverage. So I definitely think that this camera, the X-T3, is a very viable option for hybrid shooters who are trying to do photo and video. You have a ton of options with all the film simulations that Fujifilm is known for, give you a really good and unique look, as well as having a small compact body and giving you some really great video features to really step up and compare against a Sony mirrorless camera or even the new Canon and Nikon mirrorless. And the biggest difference between those cameras is that they are all full frame cameras where this is an APS-C smaller sensor. So you're gonna get a little bit different feel, a different depth of field, and you're not gonna have quite as wide of a view as you can get with those full frame cameras. Earlier in the week, we asked all of you if you had any questions about the X-T3, so we're gonna answer some of those for you right now. So the first one is from Fernando, and he's asking if there is the same paint that is on the X-T3 as there is on the X-H1. Now, I thought this was pretty interesting, and I didn't think there would be a difference, but if you look really closely in the light, there actually is a more matte finish on the X-T3, and there isn't the big chunks like you can see on the X-H1. I'm gonna show some macro shots of the paint so you can see how it differs. The next question is it worth changing to this camera system based on the other cameras that are out here in the similar price range? I definitely think this is a top performer for the price range at $1,500. This thing has some fantastic features that you're not even seeing on some of the higher end cameras like the EOS R. You're not seeing 4K 60, you're not seeing 10-bit internal. So this is definitely a runner-up, especially if you're doing a lot of hybrid shooting between photo and video. They also mentioned the lens options for this camera. Now, I know Fuji is rolling out a bunch of new lenses, including a 200 f2 with a built-in teleconverter, but I really like the 23 f1.4 and the 56 1.2 lenses right now. The next question is talking about ISO performance and then 4K 60 and 120p. Now, I'm sure you've seen a bunch of sample footage in this. I'm also going to be doing a test video, which will run through the whole ISO range to see how high you can actually push it up to that 12,800 range. And I'll show some more sample footage in that video. So that'll be coming down the line. So just make sure to stick around for when that video comes out. The next question is from Carlos asking if we carry the Fujinon X-mount zoom lens. Now, I'm pretty sure you're talking about the MKX lens, which is the 18-55 and the 50-135. Currently, we do not carry it for X-mount. We do have it in EF and E-mount, but if we get enough demand, we will definitely pick up the X-mount version. The next question comes from Manny. They want to buy a 4K camera. Should they pick up this one or the A6500? Both of them are the same price in their country. Now, I currently would definitely recommend the X-T3. Going over all of the features that you've seen in this video, there's definitely a lot more packed into this camera for a similar price point if you're willing to go the Fuji route. I really like the Fuji color over Sony, and I really like a lot of the features that they've packed into this tiny little camera, and I'm excited to see what they do down the line. So I got two more quick questions to answer. The first one is my opinion on shooting external 422 versus internal 420, or ProRes versus the 400 megabits per second. Obviously, the external recording, the 422 10-bit, is going to be a better image and more robust to work with, but the internal is a very solid thing to work with if you don't want to get an external recorder. You also get the option of ProRes if you're doing it through an external recorder, which is going to be a much easier codec to work with in Premiere. So if you're doing a lot of heavy video work, you're definitely going to want to go through that external option, because the H.265 codec in here does not work great with Premiere like I mentioned earlier. And then the last question is from Jackie: how long does the battery last? And then choosing the color, silver or black. First part, how long does the battery last? I've actually had a decent amount of performance out of the battery. They say it lasts around 400 shots, and I think just under 400 photos. And I've had probably about half a days of use on and off of the video, not doing a ton of 4K 60 work. But I would imagine if you had a couple extra batteries, you would be really good. Or if you just had the battery grip, you'll probably be able to last all day. And then silver or black, I personally like the black one better. I think it's a little more sleek looking. The silver one looks a little more hipster and old school, which is a really cool style, but it definitely stands out a little more. You can kind of sneak this into a little more places and not have as much attention drawn to it. So I think that's going to wrap it up for this video on the Fuji X-T3. If you have any more questions about anything I didn't cover in this video, make sure to let me know in the comments below. If you want to try this camera out for yourself, make sure to head on over to lensprotogo.com. If you enjoy this video, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe for new videos every single week, and I'll see you in the next one.